Senator Elizabeth Warren is here with us this morning. Let's go on the record. A standard bearer for progressive policy, now facing the turbulence of a midterm election cycle, from inflation to Ukraine to a divided Washington. Is there a path forward for Democrats in 2022? The senator's here. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR. I'm Ed Harding, along with Newsletter 5's political reporter Janet Woods. Great to have you with us this morning. Congratulations, we've made it to May. And we're very pleased to have Senator Elizabeth Warren with us this morning. She is a Democrat, the state senior senator in Washington, first taking office back in 2013, a candidate for president in 2020, the special advisor to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau during the Obama administration, a law professor at Harvard, a resident of Cambridge. Senator, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. It's
great
good
to
to be here.
Happy May.
Thank you.
Happy May.
Thank you for joining us, and let's dive right in. Sure. Elon Musk. You're not happy about his latest purchase, and there are multiple issues that are at play here. First of all, his enormous buying power, the freedom of speech issue, and less government oversight if he decides to take Twitter private. What bothers you the most?
Oh, hard, because you've given me a full range here. But let's start with how it is he has so much money to be able to do this. And part of the answer is because for years he didn't pay any taxes. And that tells you about one of the things that's wrong in our system, and that is that a handful of billionaires keep amassing more and more and more wealth, and they do it in part subsidized by Boston school teachers and iron workers who actually pay their taxes every year. So part of what troubles me has been this amassing of power because of the distortions in our tax system. But the second part is, look what he wants to take over. Wants to take over a way that tens of millions of Americans talk to each other, and it's largely unregulated right now. And he wants to be the only person who makes the decision about whatever are going to be the rules of the road. And I just think too much power in the hands of one person.
And if he decides to take Twitter private?
Well, that's what worries me.
Does government have a right to step in and try to do something about it, or is there nothing you can do?
Government should be stepping in right now. We need rules of the road for tech, because ultimately what we are facing is this is a huge communication device. Either one man, and it doesn't matter to me who that one man is for this point, one man can make the decision what all the rules are going to be, and of course help himself and advance his interests. Or in a democracy, we can decide, nah, we're all going to have at least a say in how the rules of the road are written. That's what we've done in other areas. That's what we need to do with tech.
But on the bottom line, what's wrong with I pay, I say? If he puts up the $44 billion, why can't he say?
Well, the problem is what we're talking about here is he's not just buying something that produces cars. What he's talking about, what we're talking about here, is a way that tens of millions of people communicate with each other. People receive news. People form groups. And in the same way that we've decided that as a public, we're going to decide the rules of the road, newspapers on liability, a lot of competition, that we're going to do the same thing for television, for broadcast. We need the same,
regulated by government.
The same kind of thing where there are at least rules of the road. Second point, if I just can quick, also look how the thing is set up to create its own internal monopoly. You know, right now, if you want to set up another platform, and others have tried, the problem is you can't still reach all the people you reached on Twitter, right? Unlike with your telephone, you can switch to another phone company and still reach everybody that you could have called with your old telephone company. We don't have that right now, and that's what's happening with these platform effects. So that's why we need some rules in order to create more competition. That way, people don't like what Elon Musk does, we'll go somewhere else.
I wanted to talk about items that are still on the docket. Climate change.
Yep.
Childcare.
Yep.
Taxes to pay for it all.
Yep.
Is it time to pass something where there's a wiggle room to assure that that votes from Senator Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema will allow it to get through?
Yes.
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 And the only one I would add to that one in particular is also reducing the cost of prescription drugs.
Yes.
That is very much
What are you
still
willing
a
to
part of
give
the
up
package.
to sort of sweeten the pot so that the other two senators will vote?
Janet, I'm only talking about 4 things. That's a lot of sweetener that's already gone in there.
But there's things that Kyrsten Sinema said she will not vote for. There are
But
things
not on that list.
Well, Joe Manchin does, though. He doesn't want to deal with the climate change issues.
That's it, but that's the point. That's what the negotiation is about right
so
now.
let's put student loans on the table
Yes.
here. The president said this week that he looked into the camera and said that $50,000 in student loan forgiveness is off the table.
Oh, but
I'm going to stop there. This is a multi-layered question, but I'm going to stop there.
But remember what the president did say, is that he is clearly moving toward cancellation of student loan debt. He's not saying he doesn't have the power to do it. He's going to try to figure out the right way to do it. And I say, good for you, Joe Biden.
So you're thinking that he is going to cancel it for not just people in public service, but for all groups?
I think that it is so powerfully important that we must cancel a big chunk of student loan debt. And let me remind you, 40% of the people who have student loan debt don't have a college diploma. These are people who were born into families that couldn't write a check to go to college and who tried. God bless them, but life happened. Pregnancies, they were trying to work 3 jobs, mom got sick, they moved to another town and weren't able to make it through. And now these are people who are dealing with college level debt on what a high school grad makes.
So if he does not pass something or the Democrats put nothing out there, will the Democrats lose Congress in November?
Look, I think the Democrats need to act, but let me be triple clear on student loans. The reason to cancel $50,000 of student loan debt is because it is the right thing to do. I went to school at a time when you could get a college diploma, $50 a semester, part-time waitressing job. You could make it all the way through with no debt. And the reason for that is because American taxpayers invested in post-high school education, technical school, 2-year college, 4-year college.
But the bottom
That's
line is,
not out there.
But the bottom line is, if you don't get this through, is it going to be really incredibly hard for Democrats to
that
keep
if
control?
we don't deliver, and that means student loan debt, that means the kind of tax reforms, making the billionaires and giant corporations pay. That means climate, and that means bringing down costs for families. If we don't deliver as Democrats, then we're not going to make it in November.
In this discussion,
We're not going to make it in November.
in this discussion, where is Mitt Romney wrong? Where he says, okay, why stop at student loan debt? Why don't we forgive car debts? Why don't we forgive mortgages? They're as crippling as others.
No, they're not. First of all, because the United States government has many more collection rights and, believe me, uses them. There are tens of thousands of Americans right now who are living on Social Security whose checks are being garnished for student loans. You can't do that for credit cards. You can't do that for a mortgage payment or a car loan. But remember, that's the whole point. What did these people go invest in? They invested in trying to get an education, something that's not only good for them personally, but good for all of us. An educated workforce is what makes America stronger. Go back and look at the data on what happened with the GI Bill.
Right.
It not only made the people who took advantage of it themselves did better off, it lifted our entire nation and sustained 50 years of economic growth. We want people to get an education. First step then is let's deal with this student loan debt. Second one is going to be let's make college affordable for everyone.